Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Lamed Zayin. Today's daf is the daf for Shabbat of Hanukkah. So Hanukkah Sameach to everybody. We're going to review quickly what we finished off with yesterday. We were discussing, or in the previous daf, we were discussing about the Sela. Is the Sela discussed in Mishnayot? Is it the Sela Tsuri or the Sela Medina? The Sela Medina is an eighth of the value. And then we had a case where they said the Sela that you're liable for Boshet is the Sela Hamedina, which was 1/8 of the Sela Tsuri, which ended up as half a zuz. So the person who was awarded that amount of money said, I don't want to give it to the poor people. It's so little. Then he changed his mind. But Rav Yosef said, sorry, too late. And basically he said, the poor people already have rights to it, even though they weren't in the room. Even though there were no poor people here. We are the hand of the aniyim. The Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel, as Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Yitomim enam tzrichim pruzbol, v'chein Tani Rami Bar Chama, Yitomim enam tzrichim pruzbol, Rabban Gamliel u'Beit Dino avihem shel Yitomim hayu. So we have two statements saying orphans don't need a pruzbol. What does it mean they don't need a pruzbol? It means if they lent money, and normally the Shemitah year would come and cancel the loans, and normally you would write a pruzbol to basically avoid that. They don't even need to do that because the loans aren't canceled if they're under the jurisdiction of the court. And the orphans are under the jurisdiction of the court, just like the poor people. And therefore, and he even said, Rami Bar Chama even brought up right that said that Rabban Gamliel and his court are like the fathers of the orphans. So you see from here that the court can function as the hand of the orphans and therefore also the poor people. And that's why Rav Yosef says it's too late. We already took rights to your money from as our rights for the poor people. Now, there's a very big question here, which is, was the person who basically committed this money to charity, by saying I committed the money to charity, is he allowed to change his mind? So there's a big question that comes up, and this is very, very relevant. If you say, I'm going to give X amount of money to charity, can you change your mind about it? Okay, is saying it already as if you did it. So the Rif is going to basically use our sugya and discuss two opinions about this. First, he's going to bring someone else's, and then he's going to bring his own. The pages of the Rif you can find in the big Gemara in the back. So in the 4th chapter, in the pages of the Rif, it basically says here that there's someone who says from here that you learn that anyone who gives something to poor people by just saying it alone. Now, by the way, even before I continue, where does this come from? Well, giving money to charity is kind of like giving money to the temple. And if you say, I'm giving something to the temple, I'm sanctifying something, by saying you're going to give it to God or the temple, it's as if you already gave it, as if like you did a kinyan with a human. In other words, when it comes to human relationships, you would have to do a kinyan and actually pass it. But when it comes to sanctifying something, just by saying it. So the question is, where does charity fall in? So basically, he says you can prove from our sugya that charity is like a regular person, because there's a halacha that we saw in Gittin, basically, that says that if I say I owe you money and I say it in front of 3 people, I have to give you the money because it's as if I did it. But that's only because I did it in front of 3 people. And here it seems like this whole thing worked because he did it in front of 3 people. He was in a court, and that's why. But were it not in a court, it sounds like just by saying I'm giving money to poor people, he would be able to change his mind. The Rif, though, says that is not true, because there's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that says, Beficha zot tzedakah, Rosh Hashanah daf vav, Amud Aleph. It says, with your mouth, that's charity, meaning that you are already committed as soon as you say it. And this is, in fact, how we generally rule about charity. Yes, you said you're going to do it, you have to give the money. And he then says, so what about here? Here he says there's a bit of a difference, because here it's only because Rav Yosef said I already acquired it on behalf of the poor people, which sounds like if he hadn't, like if I just say I'm giving it to charity and there's no court there that acquires it on the behalf, then maybe I could change my mind, because this implies that had Rav Yosef not done that, he would have been able to change his mind. However, this is rejected by the Rif, because the Rif says that it's not that it's rejected, it's true in this case, but that's only because the money hadn't yet come into his possession. Because of that, only if the poor people acquired it if Rav Yosef acquired it for the poor people, could he not change his mind, because he didn't even have the money to commit. So that's, if you and he uses it from rules of sanctification. If I sanctify something that's not even in my domain, it's not on my property yet, it's meaningless. But that implies that if it were in my domain, just by saying it alone would be enough, and he wouldn't really be able to change his mind at all. So it all comes out of our sugya, which is always interesting to see relevant questions that come from what we're learning. Okay, now we're going to move on. We have a story about Hanan Bisha. Okay, Bisha is someone who's a bad person. So it's a negative name. So his name was Hanan Bisha, or they called him Hanan Bisha. His name was Hanan. They called him Bisha, bad person. Takale lahu gafra. He basically smacked someone in the ear, like the two different interpretations we saw before, blew in someone's ear. Ata the Kamei Rav Huna. They went before Rav Huna. He said, you have to pay boshet. Amale zil havle palga dezuza. Give him half a zuz. Now here we're going to have a different issue. Havale zuza macha. He had a bad zuz. Okay, Rashi says it was that the what do you call it? Can't even think of my words. A coin has, something on it, the shape, the whatever is engraved on it. It was fading. Okay, it was already not as good as it was before. And by lemitva lemine palga dezuza, he had a whole zuz. He wanted to pay half. So you tried to exchange it either with the person who was supposed to pay for or to somebody else. They wouldn't take it. They said, it's not a good coin. Lo avimishtakale, so he couldn't give it. Takale achrine v'yaveniale. So how did he resolve his problem? Well, he only owed half a zuz, and he couldn't get change for his one zuz. But he wanted to use that zuz because it was a bad one. He wasn't going to really be able to use it too much in the shuk. So he did the same thing to the person again and made himself liable for a full zuz, and then gave him the full bad zuz. And apparently, it seems like you could do that. Okay, even though it seems quite unfair to the person who's getting it, but right, obviously, wasn't completely not good, but it wasn't good enough that it was hard to use. New Mishna. Shor shu muad lemino. I'm going to read this Mishnah in one way. We're going to see as soon as we get to the Gemara, there's two ways to read this Mishnah. Okay, I'll read it the way the Gemara eventually kind of concludes that this seems to be the better reading. Shor shu muad lemino. Okay, we have shor who gores oxes. Okay, the ox gores oxes. And they're known to gore oxes. They've done it, this shor has done it 3 times. Ve'eno muad l'she'eno mino. But we haven't seen the shor goring any other animals. Muad la'adam, second case. We have a shor who gores people. Ve'eno muad l'behema, but isn't known to gore other animals. Muad l'ktanim, he's seen to be goring small animals. Ve'eno muad l'gdolim, but hasn't been seen to be goring big animals. And we're going to have to see what it means it hasn't been seen. Okay, we'll talk about this. I'm not explaining it too well yet. We see we make a split here. If he's muad for oxen and not for other animals, then only if he gores an ox is he going to have to pay full, the owner's going to pay full damages. If he gores a cow, okay, or maybe you say cow and ox are in the same family, I don't know, but gores a dog, so it doesn't have to pay. Amru lefanav Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, what if we have an animal who is known to gore on Shabbat, but not during the week? Now, you might say, what does a shor know from Shabbat during the week? But a shor definitely knows because a shor lives with us, and we have differences between the way we run things on Shabbat and the way we run things during the week. First of all, we're not allowed to work our animals, so the shor isn't working on Shabbat. Now, why would a shor be more likely to gore on Shabbat and not during the week? Well, we all know, okay, take little kids or even sometimes grown-ups. You're out of your schedule, right? Particularly little kids. You're out of your schedule. You don't know how to behave, right? It's crazy. Like when your kids are little and there's no school on Shabbat, everyone's off the wall, right? Bouncing off the walls, behaving crazy because there's no structure. The animal also, when there's no structure and work to do, so goes a little crazy, gets wild. So that's one explanation. There's another interesting one about how we're wearing different clothes and that affects, the shor sees that things are different and that sometimes also affects the way they behave. Anyway, interesting theory here. But would they ask, what's the case? Could you be muad to gore on Shabbat and not on other days of the week? Amar lehem, yeah. He said, in fact, you're right. Yes, you could have such a case where the shor only gores on Shabbatot, and then it's muad. If it gores on Shabbat, you'll pay full damages. If it gores during the week, you'll only pay half. Tam, like we've seen in the previous Mishnah, how does it revert back to being a short tam? According to this, so it would have to be, in order to have this shor that was considered a shor muad for Shabbatot, you would have to have 3 weeks where it didn't gore on Shabbat, and then it would go back to being a short tam. for Shabbatot. Now we're going to read the Mishnah a little better and read it in two different ways. Itmar, it was said, Rav Zvid Amar, ve'eno muadzna. Rav Papa Amar, eno muadzna. So there's all a difference in one letter of a vav, but a letter that appears a bunch of times in the Mishnah. Every time it says eno muad, is it read as ve'eno muad or eno muad? So how are we going to read this? Well, let's keep reading for a minute and then we'll go. Rav Zvid Amar, ve'eno muadzna, which means hastama have muad. Now let's read it. A shiur that's muad lemino, I'm going back to the Mishnah, and is not muad for eno mino. That means the shiur gores oxen, but is not muad for goring other animals. That means, now, we didn't really get this the first time, but what it means is, if we have an ox that gored 3 times to another ox, we assume right now that it's going to gore anyone. Okay. However, if we saw that it doesn't gore gorillas, okay, then like 3 occasions the shiur came in contact with the gorilla and didn't gore it, then we'll call that shiur a shiur tam for gorillas. But you would have to have had scenarios where they were in contact with the gorillas and didn't gore them, in a similar situation to the shiur case where they did gore. But if you don't know otherwise, once he gores 3 times, it doesn't matter who he gored, what he gored, is going to be considered a shiur tam for anyone. Rav Papa says, Eino muadzna, destama lo have muad. Rav Papa reads this totally differently. Now we're going to start from the beginning. Shiur shehu muad lemino, eino muad l'she'eno mino. And then that's it's not this shiur who's muad to this and is not muad to that. No, he reads it as a shiur is muad to animals, to a certain type, right? His own type, is not muad to others. A shiur who's muad to a person is not muad to animals. A shiur who's muad to young, small animals is not muad to large animals. And he reads the whole Mishnah in that way. Okay, we're going to see if there's a big problem with this reading, but right now we're going to read it that way. And then, distama lo habi muad. That means if you gored 3 times an ox, you are not muad for anything else. We don't know anything. We've never seen you with another animal. But we just assume just because you gore oxen doesn't mean you gore other animals. So it's a very big difference in how to understand this, what the case is. So now we're going to see where they each get it from. And then as we say he gets it from here, we're going to have to say, how did the other person read it? Razvid diet mi seifa, Papa diet mi reisha. Razvid learns it from the last case in the Mishnah, and Rav Papa learns it from the beginning, which is really the second case. There's 3 cases, if you remember. There's its type and other types, humans and animals, and small and large. So Rav Zvid is going to learn it from the small and large. Rav Zvid diet mi seifa, de katani. Muad l'ktanim ve'eno muad l'gdolim. If it's muad for small animals, it generally gores small animals. It's not, right? And we know it doesn't gore big animals. But again, if bistan, right, we don't know anything, then we're going to assume it can also gore big animals. So if you go with Rav Zvid, that bistan muad l'ktanim is going to be muad l'gdolim, just unless you see it doesn't. Hastama have muad, right? And then stam, it would be muad for gdolim if you don't know otherwise. Hakamashman on this line is coming to teach you something you didn't see in the other cases, which is to afila miktanim gdolim nami mistama have muad. That just because it gores small animals, and you might think, well, if it gores small animals, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to start up with bigger animals. No, we're going to assume this is a crazy animal and could gore, or violent animal, could gore big animals as well. But iamart eno muad katane. If you say it's ena muad is what it says, and stama lo havi muad, and that means an ox who's muad for ktanim is not muad l'gdolim, which makes sense because, just because you gore small animals don't mean you're going to go large animals, but it's just unnecessary. If you're going to say, if it gores small oxen, it's not going to be muad for, in line number 1, for small dogs, right? Then miktanim l'gdolim tzrif ala meimer de lo havim muad. Of course, then if it gores small animals, it's not going to be muad for large animals. Of course, it wouldn't be likely to do that. So why would you even need it to say that? So therefore, that line is really unnecessary. Well, Rav Papa Amar Lecha, he could explain why it is necessary. Itzrich, you need it. Why? Sakadata chamina hu il upratzbe bahu mina pratzbe. Lo shna gdolim didei, lo shna ktanim didei. You might think, well, it might gore oxen, but it doesn't gore dogs. But once it gores oxen, small, large, it doesn't matter. It could have gored 3 small ones. Well, it's got a thing for goring oxen. What's the difference whether they're small or large? And that's why it comes to teach you, no, it's not muad for gdolim. Don't think that. Okay, that was Rav Zvid's proof and how Rav Papa got around that. Now we're going to do Rav Papa's proof. Rav Papa diet miration. De katani muad la'adam no muad lebeheman. He's going to focus on line 2. If you're muad for humans, you're not necessarily expected to, right, be muad lebehemot. Or Rav Zvid says, if you're muad for animals, for humans, we do expect you to gore animals. But if you prove that you don't, because you've been in that situation, then we won't assume the animals, right, muad for animals. So now, which does this work better for? If you're going to say like Rav Papa, that it means one is warned for people is not forewarned for animals. And that means, right, not and we don't know anything, we're not going to assume. Well, then it's obvious what it's teaching you. It's to teach you that even from Adam to Behema, even, right, you might think, right, animals normally gore each other, not humans. So you would say, what do you mean though? An animal, you might say, okay, oxen, maybe only oxen, not other animals. But if you gore humans, of course you're going to gore animals. Well, hakamashbalan, then that line is teaching you something new. That afilu me'adam lebe'ema namistami lo havim muad. Right? That even from an Adam, a person gores humans, to animals, we're not going to assume that you're muad. But if you go to Rav Zvid and you say normally the animal gores humans, and we can assume animals, right? The assumption is also muad. But if you see the person hasn't gored an animal, then you see it was in situations and it didn't gore, then we can assume it's not muad for animals. But hastam havi muad, but stam it would be. If, again, Rav Zvid thinks if you gore oxen, the assumption is you gore other animals as well, unless we see otherwise. Well, then humans also. Obviously, then it would be an assumption that you gore animals. You wouldn't need any sort of, right? That would be totally obvious. So Rav Zvid Amar Lecha, how's Rav Zvid going to answer this? And it really is totally useless, that second line. Reisha achazara. This is actually talking about not how does it become a shor muad or a shor tam. What it's focusing in on is why it added this case is for how you revert back to being a shor tam, like the last line of the Mishna, which is what? So you're muad la'adam. Again, we stam assumed you were muad for an animal. Now you start proving, right? Or maybe you even gored animals as well. And then the animal stopped, not you, the animal. The animal stops goring animals. Okay, 3 times doesn't gore an animal. That's what we're going to see. After, right, it gored humans, it gored animals. Then it stopped goring animals, was in a situation 3 times, didn't gore. But this animal still gores humans. So you might say, if it gores humans, you might say the fact that it gores animals, doesn't gore animals anymore, is irrelevant because, okay, so it had 3 situations where it didn't gore animals, but it still gores humans. It's obviously going to still gore animals. No, therefore it comes to teach you, no. Humans and animals can be different. That if it really stops goring animals, we can judge that separately, and you can have a case where you're going to be liable. Full damages for human and half damages for an animal. For, again, damages to a human, damages to an animal. Okay, so what we did so far was we saw Rav Zvid and Rav Papa in 2 different ways to read our Mishnah, which the main ramification is, do we assume, what's the base assumption without knowing anything about the other type, whether it's big, whether it's a different type of animal, or whether it's human versus animal, without knowing anything, do we just assume once you're muad for one type, you're going to be muad for everything? Or is it, no, you're actually, according to Rav Papa, you're not muad for anything, right? You're only muad for what you've done. And then we go after patterns, right? If we see you've done this, then we can assume you're muad for that and not for other things. So now we're going to question Rav Zvid. We bring a Tanaitic source. Sumcha says, muad la'adam muad le'be'ema mikal v'chomer. Okay, if you're muad for a person, you're obviously muad for an animal from an obvious kal chomer. Mala adam muad l'beima lo kol sheken, right? If you're muad for a person, again, we talked about this before. Animals more likely gore other animals. So if it's going to gore humans, it obviously is going to gore animals. Michlal, what can you infer from here then? Tanakama ain't a muad tamar. The Tanakama thinks muad le'adam is not muad le'beima, and that goes against Rav Zvid, because again, Rav Zvid said only if you're muad le'adam and we've seen you with animals and you didn't gore them, then you're not muad for an animal. But if stam you're muad for a person, you are muad for animals as well, and that's what Sumchus says. So why would Sumchus be arguing if Tanakama says what he said? Amalei Rav Zvid could answer Sumchus achazarakai. Again, we're going to answer like before. Sumchus is referring to how does it revert back to being a short time. This is what is said to Tanakama. You said an animal can revert back to being a short time if regarding animals, if this animal stops goring animals. But I think that no. If the animal continues to gore humans and stops goring animals, we do not call this a short time when it comes to animals like you think. I said because of a kal v'chomer me'adam. Uma me'adam lo kamahadr be'ema lo kol sheken. Right? If it's not going to change its behavior from humans, for sure it's not going to change its behavior from animals. I don't care that it didn't gore 3 times. We're not changing its status. So that's the machloka between them. And then Rav Zvi works perfectly fine because it's not talking about how do you become a shor muad. It's talking about how do you get out of being a shor muad. Now we're going to have some support for Rav Zvi. Amar Rav Ashi Tashma. Let's learn it from here. From where? Our Mishna. What does our Mishna say at the end? Amru lefnei Rabbi Yehuda. Now the assumption is when Rabbi Yehuda talks in the question, they asked Rabbi Yehuda, also the words ve'eno muad came in. And again, wherever it says ve'eno muad in the Mishnah, Rav Papa is going to read it as eno muad. This line is going to be very hard to read as eno muad, and you'll see why in a minute. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, hareze muad l'shabbatot ve'eno muad l'yamot hachol. If you have an animal who is muad for Shabbat, okay, they gore on Shabbat, but they do not gore on chol, which is what ve'eno muad means, right? And they do not gore on weekdays. And then amar lahem, so right, basically they're saying, what's the halacha? And then he says to them, l'shabbatot mashalem nezek shalem, liyamot hachol mashalem chatzi nezek. And he said, yes, in that case, we're going to rule muad for Shabbat, not muad, right? Tam for weekdays. If you read it the way I just did, a ve'eno works perfectly. They asked him a question, and they answered. He answered. But now try to read it. They said before Rabbi Yehuda, this is muad for Shabbat. Now, eno muad means it's not if it does this and that, that's the end. It's without the word end. If it does this, it's not muad l'shabbatot. So not muad l'yamot. So basically, what they say to him is, if it's muad, it is muad l'shabbat, this animal, and is not muad for yamot chol, meaning it's a short time, which means that they're actually saying one that's muad for Shabbat is not muad for weekdays, which means they're not actually asking a question. What? The students went to Rabbi Yehuda and taught him this halacha and said an animal that's muad for Shabbat is not muad for Yomot Chol and it's going to be half damages. And even if you say, yes, maybe they were teaching Rabbi Yehuda this halacha, his response is, if you remember, he says to them, on Shabbat you pay nezek shalem, and for Yomot Chol you pay chatzi nezek. You pay only half damages, which means that he's answering them. But if they already said that, which is basically what they said, right? But two, then what's he responding with? He's responding with exactly what they said. So you can't read the Mishnah in that way. Another support for Rav Zvid, Amar Rav Yana, Miresha Nami Daika, also from earlier in the Mishnah, Dikatane, Et shemuad lo mishalem nezek shalem, ve'et she'ena muad lo mishalem chatzi nezek. Now, again, Iamar bishlama ve'eno muad katane, perush Kamma farish. Now, you might not remember the Mishnah, but let's go back. The Mishnah gives 3 cases. Sure, who's muad to its type, but not other types. Sure, that's muad for humans, not animals. Sure, that's muad for young animals, but not large animals, older animals, big animals. And then it says, right, so if you read it like Rav Zvid, if it's muad for this, and it happens to also not be muad for the other types, meaning we saw it with the other types and it's not, then the halacha is, continue, Et shehu muad lo mishalem nezek shalem ve'et she'enu muad lo mishalem chatzi nezek, right? So then we establish it's muad for this, not for that. Therefore, for this, it will pay that, and for that, it will pay that, right? Half damages. But if you say Rav Papa, there's no end there, then it reads like this. A shore who's muad for its type is not muad for other types. If it's muad for humans, it's not muad for behemoth. If it's muad for small ones, it's not muad for old ones. Now, at that point, it then says, and if it's muad, you pay full damages. If it's not muad, you pay half damages. Well, we're on page 37 of Bava Kamma. Everybody knows that by now. Everybody knows that shor tam pays half and shor muad pays full. There's no point to tell you that. According to Rav Zvid, it's telling you, if it was this and that last line is, then this is what the halacha is. But if you say, if it's this, it is not that, and then you don't need that last line to explain to you what the halacha is. We all know that. So that's what we're going to read right now. If you read it like Rav Zvid, then that line is coming to explain what the halacha is. But Pascha, right? It already, the first three lines already have the psak, it's final. My two, what does it need anymore? Until now, what? We didn't know that hatam mishalem chatzi nezek, muad mishalem nezek shalem. What, do we not know that? So therefore, it doesn't read very well according to Rav Papa. However, the Gemara continues to say, nami Rav Papa, nami ita Rav Papa. And even if you want to suggest maybe there is some way to read Rav Papa, and let's take what he says also, that again, someone who's muad for this is not muad for that no matter what, as opposed to the stam Rav Zvid is muad for other things. Still, nagach shor chamor v'gamal, sorry, I didn't read that well, nagach shor chamor v'gamal, if an ox gored another ox, a camel and a donkey, naseh muad lakol. If it did those three animals, at that point we assume it will attack any animal. So there's a way, even according to Rav Papa, you could be stam muad to all animals, even if you've never gored them before. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to have two other cases here, and then we're going to go into a slew of kind of crazy questions. Ra'ah shor nagach, shor lo nagach, shor nagach, shor lo nagach, shor nagach, shor lo nagach. Okay, we have a pattern. Sees an animal, gores. Next animal he sees doesn't gore. The next animal he does, the next animal he doesn't. The next animal he does, the next animal he doesn't. So he now gored three times, but in, how do you say it? With intervals. So, you could become muad for every other. Okay, so if he gores on the other time, then it'll be a short time. If he gores on that time, right, the whatever, however you say it, but then he will be a shor muad. Tanu Rabbanan, Ra'a shor nagach, chamor lo nagach, suchs nagach, gamal lo nagach, pered nagach, arod lo nagach. Okay, he sees a shor, an ox, he gores. He sees a donkey, doesn't. He sees a horse, does. He sees a camel, doesn't. This is in succession. Then he sees a mule, does. And then he sees a wild donkey, doesn't. Okay, again, this would be a case where we're going to assume every other of any animal, because you have an array of animals here and gored some and not others. You see, by the way, it's not the same animals as before. Here he gored a shor, an ox, a cow, and a horse and a mule. As opposed to before, the shor, the donkey, and the camel. Now come our slew of questions. We're going to have a long slew of questions that are all going to end in teku. Shol, chamor, gamal. Okay, we have in succession. He gores ox, camel, donkey, camel. Mahu, what's the case? Here are the two sides. Mahu, shor batra, the third shor. Batar shvarim shadin alo. Do we say it goes shor is one unit, and then we start again, chamor, gamal, and then we only have two other animals, and we don't learn from there to everything. And then we just say he's a muad for sure, because we have three of shor, but we don't have three of other animals, even though in the end you have a shor, chamor, and gamal, but the first shor, the last of the shors, is already accounted for, and you can't count it twice. Or do we say, no, don't connect the shor with the other two shvarim. Just say we have a shor, chamor, and gamal, and now from there we can learn that he's muad to everything. Second question. Hi, shor kamma, chamor, gamal, shol, b'shol. Now we have the opposite order. Donkey, camel, shor, shor, and shor. So do we look at the first three and say, look, hi, shor Kamma, the first shor, of which is number 3, goring, batar chamor v'gamal shadinale. We put it together with the chamor, the shor, the chamor and the gamal, the donkey and the camel, v'ayile l'kulimine. And then we say, okay, he's warned for everything. Oh, Dilma, batar shvarim shadinale, v'akate l'shvarim u'di'ayid lemina achrina lo yayid. Or do we say it goes by the shor? And even though he's forewarned when it comes to shvarim, he's not forewarned for all other things. Because there's 3 shvarim, we basically say, oh, let's put it together with the shvarim, even though the first 3 happened first. But it doesn't matter. The fact that he did 2 shvarim after the shor, let's just put all those 3 together and look at them as a unit. And then he's not muad for goring other animals. Same question, type of question here. Shabbat, 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 Echad b'Shabbat, B'Sheni b'Shabbat. He gored on Shabbat, 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 then Sunday, Monday. So, do we say, Ha Shabbat Batraita Batar Shabbat Udishadin Ale? The last Shabbat goes with the first 2 Shabbatot, and basically he's muad for Shabbatot, and then he only has 2 gorings during the week, so we ignore that, right? Ba'akate l'Shabbat hu di'ayid li'imot hachol lo yayid. He's only muad for Shabbat, but not during days of the week. O Dilma Batar Echad b'Shabbat B'Sheni b'Shabbat Shadin Ale v'yayid le'kule yoma. Or do we say he's warned for the Shabbat goes together with Shabbat, Sunday, Monday. And then we have 3 days. It's one of them is Shabbat, but what's the difference? It's 3 days. And then he's basically a shor muad for any day of the week. Chamishi b'Shabbat v'erev Shabbat b'Shabbat b'Shabbat Shabbat. Again, the reverse. Starts Thursday, Friday, Shabbat, and then goes Shabbat, Shabbat. So, mahu. Ha Shabbat kamaita batar chamishi b'Shabbat v'erev Shabbat shadin alei. Do we say the first Shabbat goes together with a unit of Thursday, Friday, Shabbat? Because we started with that. And therefore, we say he's a shor muad for any day of the week. Or, O Dilma, HaShabbat Kamaita, Batar Shabbatot, Hidishadin Aleu, L'Shabbatot, Udimiyai. Or do we say that the first Shabbat, which is goring number 3, goes with the next 2 Shabbatot where it happens. And then we're going to view that as a unit of, it's shor muad for 3 Shabbatot, and we ignore the first 2 because those are not a unit of 3. And then he's only muad for Shabbat. As we expected, and as I kind of warned you about this, teku, we don't have an answer to this question. Again, teku is short for tekom, it will stand. Or tishbi yitaretz kushiyot ubayot, which means Eliyahu Tishbi will come and he'll finally give us the answers to these questions that we don't have answers to. Okay, next section. Okay, we're still continuing with cases like this, and these are patterns, and we're going to connect this to, if you didn't think about it before, these sound similar to patterns when a woman is menstruating. There's patterns to her cycle. And because of that, the rabbis have all these halachot about when you're expected to get your cycle. And if you have some sort of pattern, we've created a chazaka of 3 times, then you're more expected to get it then, and the halachot are stricter. Okay, we'll get to all this when we get to nida, but now the rabbis are going to compare this. So for example, Nagach shor yom tetvav b'chodesh zeh, yom tetzayim b'chodesh zeh, yom yudzayim b'chodesh zeh. So we have a shor who gores on the 15th of the month, and then the 16th of the month, and then the 17th of the month. So, plukta de Rabbi Shimon, do we say, we can assume next month he's going to gore on the 18th of the month? Okay, why is shor be connected with the month? Well, again, there's lunar cycles and things like that, which could affect things. So, again, why exactly? It's a little bit strange, but they say the same thing, by the way, with menstrual cycles, that they could be affected by the moon and cycles of the moon. In any case, whether you think there's reason to or not, the halacha is when you see a pattern, you go with the patterns. So, what's the machlok at Rabbi Shimon? So whatever machloket they have in nida, they're going to have here as well with menstruating women. Yom tetvav b'chodesh zeh, yom tetzayim b'chodesh zeh, yom yudzayim b'chodesh zeh. Rav amar kaval aveset. Rav says, okay, you saw 3 times, 15th, 16th, 17th. You basically created a veset. We already assume on the 18th next month, right? It's clear, right? And then again, all these halachot apply. Whatever they are, we're not going to discuss them now, but 3 times already sets it. Shmuel Amal, shalesh b'dilug. What does this mean? He says, no, dilug means skipping, which means that we're really concerned with not, the first month doesn't mean anything. It's from the first to the second. You skipped a day, right? You added, not skipped a day, you added another day. So that means that on the second month, that really only counts as 1. And then you have another skipping from 16 to 17. And then you have to have a skipping from 17 to 18. So until the 4th month, you're actually not going to have a veset. It's only going to be considered a veset. Like this is your cycle that's determined by 3 times is only going to be after 4 months. So that same machloket they're going to have here. Is the shore considered a shore muad after month 3 or after month 4? Amar Rav, Shama kol shofar v'nagach, kol shofar v'nagach, kol shofar v'nagach. A shore hears someone blowing a shofar 3 times, and every time he hears it, he gores. So this is also similar, by the way, to menstruating women also. Sometimes there's actions that could cause the onset of the menstruation. And therefore, if every time the woman does a certain action and then sees blood, we can connect it with there and she can create a veset, what's called, for that action. So likewise here with the shore. Now, muad l'shofarot. It becomes muad for a shofar. Pshita, Gemara says that's quite obvious. What are you telling us? Well, you might have thought the first time was just like a shock and the animal responded. And then maybe it doesn't count and maybe you need 3 after that. But no, this is coming to teach you, no, the first one counts as well. New Mishna. Shor shel Yisrael. Shenagach shor shel hekdesh. We're moving topics. Now we're talking about a hekdesh animal. We've talked about this before. Is there an exemption entirely for, number 1, if a hekdesh animal damages, and number that no one has to pay, the temple doesn't have to pay for damages, and is there an exemption for someone who attacks a shore that belongs to the temple? Are you exempt from paying or not? So the Mishnah rules that you're totally exempt in both cases. Shore of Yisrael, shenagach shore of hekdesh, or shel hekdesh, shenagach l'shor shel hedyot. It really should be probably hedyot. I see the aleph there changes it to hedyot. Okay, it should be hedyot there. So a shore of hedyot, the gores a shore of hekdesh. Hedyot is a regular person, and does it to a temple animal, right, one that was sanctified, or shel hekdesh shenagach l'shor shel hedyot, or the reverse, is patur, exempt, shene'amar shor re'eh v'lo shor shel hekdesh, because the verse talking about the shore talks about damages. We can see in a minute where the pasuk is and what exactly the context is, but let's just leave it generally right now. Says the shore of your friend and not the shore that doesn't belong to your friend. Shor shel Yisrael shenagach l'shor shel Knaani patur, v'shel Knaani shenagach l'shor shel Yisrael bein tam bein mu'am shalem nezek shalem. A shore of a Jew that attacks a shore of a Gentile is not liable because it says shor re'ehu. Your friend is your friend, your fellow Jew. So you're not liable for damages. But if a shore of a Gentile attacks a shore of yours, then they're liable full damages. They don't have that exemption of the shore time. Okay, where this comes from and what this is all about, we'll get to this later. Okay, not today. Now we're going to focus on the hekdesh. So the Gemara starts off and says, Matnitin deloka Rabbi Shimon ben Menasia. We want you to know there's another opinion here, and our Mishna does not follow Rabbi Shimon ben Menasia. De Tanya, as the Breita says, the first opinion of the Breita is just the one in our Mishna. Shor shel hedyot, shenagach shor shel hekdesh, v'shel hekdesh, shenagach shor shel hedyot, patur, shene'amar shor re'eh v'lo shor shel hekdesh. That's exactly what we just said. Okay, hedyot to hekdesh, hekdesh to hedyot, both cases are exempt. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasia omer, shor shel hekdesh, shenagach shor shel hedyot, patur. If the animal who gored was hekdesh, no, total exemption. But shel hedyot, shenagach shor shel hekdesh, bein tam bein mu'am shalem nezek shalem. Not only do you have to pay full damages. There is no half damages for a short time. So Amri, Micah Sever Rabbi Shimon. What was Rabbi Shimon ben Menasia thinking? Why did he get to this? It doesn't make sense. If he thought Re'ehu was only Re'ehu, then you should be exempt. If, right, you gored an ox of hekdesh, because it said, sure, Re'ehu, you gored, right, the ox gored the ox of your friends, and it's not your friends. And Re'ehu lavdaf, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean your friends, and it could include hekdesh. Well, then afilu hekdesh nami kinagach dehedyo lichai. Then the ox of hekdesh who gores should also have to pay. It's either all or nothing. It doesn't make sense. V'chitema, if you want to say lo olam kasava re'ehu dafka, it really means only your friend, meaning you shouldn't be liable for a hekdesh. Umiu dehedyo kinagach dehekdesh hainu tamid mechayev. Maybe the only reason why they made them liable is because of a simple kavachomer argument. Mishum de kamaitelem kavachomer dehedyo, which is very obvious. If a regular person ox gores an ox of a regular person, he's liable. We're always more strict when it comes to hekdesh. All the more so, he should be liable for hedyot. But what's the problem with this? What do we know? We learned already a while ago that dayo lavomen adin liot kanidon. If you're going to make a kavachomer, it's not going to be any stricter. And here the law is stricter than hedyot. So dayo lavomen adin liot kanidon. Malahalam, where are we learning it from? Tam of chatzinezek, right? That you're liable to pay your friend if you're short tam, half damages. So hachanami chatzinezek. Here it should be also chatzinezek. And if you hold like Rabbi Tarfon, that we don't hold dayo when you knock out the kaf hachomer, but there's no knockout to this kaf hachomer. The kaf hachomer takes you from 0 to half. So dayo should work. So we have to bring a different explanation. Really, everyone was supposed to pay full damages. Now they're going to point out this shor re'ehu doesn't appear in general by damages of a short time. It really appears only in the context of a short time. I'll read you the pasuk. Shmot Kaf Aleph, chapter 21, verse Lamed Hey 35. V'ki yigof shor ish et shor re'ehu. Okay, there you have it. Shore of a person, the shore of his friend. Vamet, and he dies. You pay half damages. This is the puzzle that says half damages. So comes Rish Lakish and says, really, everyone, not even just shore re'ehu, anyone who shore gores another shore was supposed to pay full damages. Came the Torah and said, when it's shore re'ehu, we're going to drop you down to half damages. But that's only for short time. Okay, and that's why it doesn't exist by hekdesh. You don't have that heter. So let's read it inside. Everyone really was supposed to pay nezek shalem. It was to teach you specifically the re'ehu who did tam b'shalem chatzi nezek. When it's your friend, you're only going to pay half damages. But the hekdesh, but if it's hekdesh, bein tam bein muad, mishalem nezek shalem. Din kain, because otherwise, nichtov kra lahai re'ehu gabe muad. It should have said re'ehu by muad, and it didn't. So there you have it. Okay, that's it for today. We'll do a quick summary. We started with the issue of the tzedakah. We talked about this ramification that comes out of Gemara about if you say you're going to give charity, do you have to actually give it? Which generally, as I said, we say you do, although the Rif did bring two opinions about it coming from our story. Then we had the shor muad. We had two ways of reading that Mishna. Shor is muad for this. Is he necessarily muad for other things? Or is he not necessarily muad for other things, but right, do we assume he's not muad at all for other things, or do we assume he is unless proven otherwise? We have Rav Zvi, we have Rav Papa. We dealt with different sources that could prove, or different ways of reading our Mishnah according to one or the other. Then we went to this issue of patterns and all different patterns that could be established, and then questions about all sorts of possible patterns. And, when they have like a combination of different things, how do we view it? We didn't have answers to those questions. We talked about skipping days of the month and things like that, comparing it to cycles of women. Then we talked about the shore of hekdesh and what the two opinions of Kamma and Rabbi Shimon ben Menasia, and where Rabbi Shimon ben Menasia gets his opinion from. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Chanukah Sameach.